It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Keanu Reeves, dressed in an unassuming hoodie, sunglasses, and a baseball cap, stepped into his own diner. But no one would know it was him, at least not right away. Keanu had always been known for his down-to-earth nature and quiet generosity, far from the glitz and glamour that often came with Hollywood fame. Yet today he wasn't the famous actor most people recognized. Today he was just another customer, blending into the crowd. His diner, a cozy little spot in downtown Los Angeles, was known for its laid-back vibe, hearty breakfasts, and a sense of community that kept people coming back. But even here, Keanu's presence loomed large. He owned the place, after all. He was the one who made sure the staff felt appreciated, who greeted regulars by name, and who always left generous tips. But despite all this, he wondered, did his employees treat him like any other boss, or did his fame affect their behavior? Keanu had decided to go undercover, to see what his staff thought of him when they didn't know who he was. He wasn't doing this out of suspicion or insecurity. He genuinely wanted to understand what it was like to be just another guy in the diner. And maybe, just maybe, he'd learn something about himself and his employees along the way as he walked through the door. The familiar buzz of conversation and the scent of fresh coffee filled the air. The staff was busy at work, laughing and chatting with customers, as the sizzling of bacon and eggs echoed from the kitchen. It was business as usual, but Keanu's heart raced. He was here for a reason, and he wasn't sure what to expect. He found an empty seat at the counter and took a deep breath, adjusting his hat to make sure it was low enough to hide his face. The waitress behind the counter, a young woman named Alice, smiled at him as she handed him a menu. "Hi there. What can I get you today?" Alice asked, glancing up briefly. "Just a coffee, please," Keanu said, keeping his voice casual and steady. He didn't want to give anything away just yet. "Coming right up," she replied, turning to grab the coffee pot. It was a simple interaction, nothing out of the ordinary, but as Keanu sat there, watching the usual hustle of the diner, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of detachment. He wasn't Keanu Reeves right now. He wasn't the guy who made movies or signed autographs. He was just another person in the room, sitting at the counter trying to go unnoticed. And that was exactly what he wanted. But little did he know, the next few hours would be filled with surprises. What Alice and Brian, two of the cashiers, would say when they didn't know he was listening, would leave Keanu shocked, confused, and maybe even a little heartbroken. But before we dive into that, let me ask you, have you ever wondered what it would be like if someone you admired saw you for who you truly are, without any of the fame or fancy titles attached? Well, that's exactly what Keanu is about to find out. Before we go any further, make sure to hit that subscribe button because, trust me, this story is about to take a major twist and you won't want to miss it. Keanu Reeves is known for many things: his legendary roles in films like The Matrix and John Wick, his kindness, his low-key lifestyle, and his philosophy of living in the moment. But behind the public figure, there's another side of Keanu, one that's not about flashing lights and red carpets. It all started years ago when Keanu decided he wanted to create something that would be a part of the community, something real and grounded. He wasn't looking to open a fancy restaurant or another trendy place for celebrities to frequent. No, Keanu had something different in mind. He wanted to own a diner, a place where people could come together over a cup of coffee and a greasy breakfast, a place where everyone was equal, no one was above the other. The diner was born out of this vision. Keanu found a small rundown space in downtown Los Angeles, far from the bustling center of the entertainment industry. It wasn't glamorous by any means, but that's exactly how he liked it. It was a project for the people, by the people. He didn't want to just be another owner who came in once in a while. He wanted to create a sense of family, a place where his staff felt comfortable, valued, and empowered. Over the years, the diner became more than just a place to eat. It became a haven for regulars, a safe space for those who needed a little bit of comfort during a tough day. Keanu wasn't the kind of boss who would sit in an office behind closed doors. Instead, he spent hours in the diner, chatting with customers, helping out when needed, and always making sure that his staff felt like they were part of something bigger than just a job. The employees appreciated this, and many spoke fondly. of him. They saw Keanu not just as their boss, but as a friend who was always willing to lend an ear or offer a hand. But that didn't mean everything was perfect. While the staff appreciated Keanu's generosity and presence, they also knew the unspoken truth. Keanu's fame was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it brought attention to the diner, filled seats, and made it a popular spot for fans and tourists. But on the other hand, his celebrity status often created a barrier, one that made it difficult for the employees to relate to him as a regular boss. Keanu could sense this. He knew that his staff treated him differently than they would if he weren't famous. People would always be polite, respectful, and deferential around him, but he couldn't help but wonder, were they really being themselves? Were they comfortable enough to be honest with him, or were they just trying to make sure they didn't say anything that would upset the big-time actor? Alice, one of the cashiers who had been with the diner for a few years, was particularly close to him. She had often praised Keanu for being understanding and humble, but Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that there was a level of formality between them. She respected him, yes, but did she truly see him as just another person, or was there always a little bit of distance because of his fame? Brian, the other cashier, was a little more guarded. He'd only recently started working at the diner, and he still didn't know how to navigate the waters of being around such a famous person. Brian liked his job, but he'd never had the chance to really get to know Keanu outside of his role as the boss. He often wondered what it would be like if they could just hang out like regular people, without the pressures of celebrity. Keanu didn't want to live in that bubble. He didn't want to be seen as untouchable or out of reach. He wanted to experience his business as it truly was, without any of the gloss or barriers that came with his stardom. So that's why he decided to do what he was doing today. He was going undercover, and he was determined to see what would happen when his employees didn't know he was watching. Keanu knew this wasn't going to be easy. He had always been comfortable in his own skin, but being undercover meant letting go of the comfort and protection his fame provided. But he was ready for it. He took a slow sip of his coffee, watching Alice behind the counter as she laughed with a regular customer. Was she really as happy as she seemed? Or was there something more she wasn't saying? And Brian, who had been a little more quiet that morning, what was he really thinking? As he sat there, the quiet hum of the diner filling the air, Keanu's mind raced with questions. What was his staff like when they didn't have to impress anyone? What would they say about him when they thought he wasn't listening? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Would you like to know what happens next? Stay tuned for the next chapter, where Keanu's undercover mission takes a surprising turn. As Keanu sat quietly at the counter, sipping his coffee, he could feel the weight of his decision settling in. He had been living in the public eye for so long that it almost felt unnatural to be a regular guy in a diner. The familiar chatter of the kitchen, the clinking of plates, and the hum of casual conversations all around him were comforting, yet slightly surreal. But beneath it all, Keanu was focused on one thing: the truth. Keanu wasn't here to create drama or stir the pot. He wasn't trying to catch his employees in some big, scandalous moment. His goal was simple. He wanted to see what it was like to be treated like a normal customer and to discover whether his staff truly saw him as more than just a celebrity. Did Alice and Brian, the two cashiers who worked the front, like him for who he was as a person, or did they treat him differently because of his fame? He had always thought of his staff as family. He'd built relationships with each of them over time, checked in on their personal lives, and tried to ensure that they felt valued in the workplace. But he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that his fame had somehow changed the dynamic. Keanu couldn't help but wonder if they were acting out of politeness, or perhaps a sense of obligation. What if they were only kind to him because they felt like they had to be? What if they weren't honest with him? What if they didn't feel comfortable speaking freely because they were always so careful not to offend the big-name celebrity who signed their paychecks? Keanu knew the risks of his undercover experiment. He could easily misread situations or take comments too personally. But he needed to know the truth. He wasn't just trying to be a passive observer. Keanu wanted to understand how his employees felt about the diner, about their roles, and about him. He wanted to know what they really thought behind the pleasantries and small talk. As the minutes ticked by, Keanu watched the staff interact with customers. Alice, in particular, seemed to be the life of the place, always smiling, always quick with a joke or a word of encouragement. She was friendly, attentive, and well-liked by the regulars. Keanu had always admired her energy, but today he saw something different, something he hadn't noticed before. Was she hiding something behind that cheerful exterior? Brian, on the other hand, was more reserved. He tended to keep to himself, quietly taking orders and ringing up customers. He didn't seem to engage as much with the patrons, but Keanu had noticed that he was always willing to help when needed. It was clear that Brian had a work ethic Keanu respected, but there was still a distance between them. Brian's interactions with customers were polite but minimal, nothing like the open warmth Alice exuded. What would Keanu discover about them once the veil of his celebrity was removed? He had no idea, but the tension in the air was palpable, and Keanu could sense that both cashiers were more focused on the job than on who he was. For once, he wasn't being treated like a famous actor. He was just another guy sitting at the counter, and that felt strange. Was this what it was like for them every day? He had been watching for about an hour when Alice and Brian started talking amongst themselves. Keanu couldn't help but overhear their conversation, and what they said next caught him completely off guard. "I swear, if one more person asks me for Keanu's autograph, I'm going to lose it," Alice said, her voice low but filled with frustration. "It's like, I get it, he's Keanu Reeves, but come on. We're all here trying to do our jobs." Brian nodded in agreement. "Yeah, and it's not like he's here every day. We never know when he's going to pop in and make everything feel awkward. I just want to get through my shift without having to talk about him every second." Keanu felt a twist in his stomach. He had heard the words, but they didn't quite sink in. Was this how they truly felt about him? About the attention he brought to the diner? He didn't know how to feel. It wasn't that Alice or Brian had said anything particularly offensive. They were just expressing the strain of dealing with the constant attention his celebrity brought, and Keanu understood that. But the reality of hearing it, especially when they thought he wasn't listening, hit harder than he anticipated. Was his presence really such a burden to them? He wanted to jump into the conversation and clear the air, but that wasn't why he was here. He had to remind himself that this was the whole point of his undercover experiment, to hear the unfiltered truth. As Alice and Brian continued talking, Keanu noticed something else. They weren't talking about the diner's atmosphere, the customers, or the food. They were talking about him. He couldn't deny the sting. This wasn't what he expected to hear. They didn't seem to be talking about their jobs as much as they were venting about the inconvenience of his fame. He wanted to address this, but the timing wasn't right. Not yet. He needed to let the conversation play out, to hear everything they had to say, and so Keanu sat in silence, the weight of the words hanging in the air. This wasn't the insight he had been hoping for, but it was the truth. The truth was complicated. It was raw. It was uncomfortable. What would you do if you were Keanu in this moment? Would you confront them right away or let things play out? Share your thoughts in the comments. Keanu couldn't shake the weight of Alice and Brian's words as he sat, quietly at the counter. The cheerful ambiance of the diner, the hum of conversation and the clatter of plates seemed to fade into the background. In that moment, all Keanu could hear was their conversation echoing in his mind. "I get it, he's Keanu Reeves, but come on. We're all here trying to do our jobs." "Yeah, and it's not like he's here every day. We never know when he's gonna pop in and make everything feel awkward." He tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing on the coffee in front of him. It was just a regular cup of diner coffee, but now it felt like a symbol of how distant he had become from the life he once knew. The life before the fame, the life before people recognized his every move. The life before Keanu Reeves became more than just a man. It became an icon. Keanu wasn't naive. He knew his celebrity status had changed the dynamics of his relationships, and the diner was no exception. But hearing it so plainly, coming from two people he thought of as his friends, was a harsh realization. He had always tried to make his employees feel like equals, like family. But what if, to them, he was always just a reminder of the life they could never have? What if his fame had made things awkward, in ways he hadn't even realized. As the conversation between Alice and Brian continued, Keanu felt the familiar pang of loneliness that often came with fame. He had built this business because he wanted to create a space where people could connect, be themselves, and feel comfortable. But now, sitting there, he was starting to wonder if he was ever truly a part of that equation. Was his own diner a place where he could escape his celebrity, or was he forever trapped in a role, both at work and in life, that kept him distant from everyone around him? The diner started to feel different, almost foreign, as Keanu sat in silence. But just as he was about to take the plunge and introduce himself to Alice and Brian, make himself known and address the elephant in the room, the unexpected happened. Brian walked up to him, holding a pad of paper and a pencil. "Hey." "I'm sorry, man," Brian said with a slightly awkward smile. "I didn't realize you were, just another guy trying to have a quiet meal." Keanu raised an eyebrow, surprised. Brian's tone had shifted, and there was an earnestness in his voice now that hadn't been there before. "Yeah. I guess it's been a little crazy around here lately with all the attention. We get a lot of people asking for autographs and photos when you show up. It's not that we don't appreciate it, but it can be a little overwhelming. You probably know what I mean." Keanu leaned forward, his heart pounding. This wasn't the confrontation he had expected. It wasn't about Alice and Brian resenting him. It was about the pressures they had been feeling all along. He hadn't considered how exhausting it could be for them to constantly navigate the space between their normal lives and the circus that his presence created. "I get it," Keanu said, looking directly at Brian. "I never meant for my presence to make things harder for you guys. I'm just here to get a good cup of coffee and relax, like everyone else." Brian's eyes widened and he looked a bit sheepish. "I wasn't sure what you were expecting, honestly. I mean, it's kind of hard to forget who you are when you're sitting right here, but I guess we all just want things to go back to normal." Keanu smiled, understanding the sentiment. He knew that this wasn't just about him. It was about the atmosphere of the diner, the familiarity they had worked so hard to build. They wanted the diner to remain the same place it had always been, not one where his fame overshadowed everything else. "That's exactly why I'm here," Keanu said softly. "To see what it's like, to feel what you feel when I'm not. The guy you see on the screen, I wanted to understand, and, well, now I do." Brian nodded slowly, seemingly relieved. "It's not that we don't appreciate you, man. It's just, sometimes we're so busy that we forget you're just a regular guy, too. We all get caught up in the rush, and it's easy to forget to treat each other like people, you know?" Keanu's heart softened. He hadn't expected this kind of honesty. It wasn't a revelation he had anticipated, but it was exactly what he needed to hear. Brian wasn't criticizing him. He was explaining how the dynamic had shifted in ways neither of them could fully control. Fame had a way of changing things, and even though Keanu had done his best to keep things real, there were times when his presence disrupted the natural flow of the diner. Just then, Alice came over, looking a little more flustered than usual. She had likely overheard the conversation and realized she hadn't been as careful as she should have been. "Keanu, I didn't mean for you to hear that," Alice stammered. Sometimes it's hard to manage everything. I love this place and I don't want it to change, but..." Keanu held up a hand, cutting her off gently. "I understand. I wasn't here to make things difficult. I just wanted to see what it's like to be here, without all the extra noise." Alice sighed in relief. "I'm glad you get it. It's not that we don't love the diner or you, it's just things get weird when everyone expects you to be perfect." Keanu nodded, appreciating her honesty. "I know what you mean. I never want to be a burden. But maybe it's time for me to step back, let things go back to normal." Brian smiled, looking more at ease now. "We're good, man. You're a good boss. We just needed to talk about it, that's all." Keanu stood up, placing a generous tip on the counter. "I appreciate both of you. You've reminded me of something important today." He glanced around at the diner, at the regulars chatting, at the staff working behind the counter. In that moment, Keanu felt a renewed sense of clarity. He wasn't just a famous actor. He was a part of this place, and he didn't want his fame to overshadow the simple beauty of what it represented, a place for everyone to feel like family. "Thanks for being honest with me," Keanu said, offering a genuine smile before turning to leave. As he walked out the door, the rain had finally stopped, and the sun broke through the clouds. It was a small moment of peace, but it was exactly what Keanu needed. Have you ever had a moment of unexpected honesty that completely changed your perspective? What do you think Keanu learned from this experience? Share your thoughts in the comments below. As Keanu stepped outside the diner, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. The weight that had been pressing on his chest for hours seemed to lighten, but there was still something gnawing at him. The conversation with Alice and Brian had opened his eyes to the pressures they faced, but it hadn't answered all of his questions. What did they really think about the diner? Were they truly content, or was there more simmering beneath the surface that he hadn't yet uncovered? Keanu wasn't done. He needed to dig deeper, to uncover the truth in a way that only he could, without his celebrity status influencing the answers. His mission wasn't over, and he knew it. As he was about to step into his car, he heard a voice from behind. "Keanu, wait!" Turning around, Keanu saw Alice jogging toward him. She looked anxious, but there was something else in her eyes, a kind of determination he hadn't seen before. "Hey," Alice said, breathless from her short sprint. "Can we talk? I need to explain something." Keanu raised an eyebrow, curious but also slightly confused. What could Alice possibly want to say now? Hadn't they just cleared the air? "I didn't mean to upset you earlier," Alice continued, her voice softer now. "I've been thinking about our conversation, and I realized I should have been more honest. It's not just about the attention or the job. There's something else." Keanu's heart quickened. This wasn't just a simple apology. Alice was about to reveal something, and it felt significant. "I've been working here for a few years now," Alice began, her voice trembling slightly. "And I've never really told you how much this place means to me. It's not just a job, it's my escape. My family isn't perfect. My life outside of here is kind of a mess, but when I'm behind that counter, when I'm here with the customers and with the staff, it feels like home." Keanu was taken aback. He had no idea Alice was struggling. She had always seemed so put together, so full of energy, so capable. To hear that the diner meant so much to her, that it was her refuge, added a new layer to the situation he hadn't even considered. "I know it's hard to understand," Alice continued, looking down at her hands, "but when you came in today, it was like, I don't know. It was like everything I'd worked so hard for was suddenly in the spotlight. It felt like the pressure of keeping this place perfect was on my shoulders, like I couldn't let you down, like I had to be more than just a cashier. I had to be good enough." Keanu's heart sank as he listened. He never realized how much his presence had weighed on Alice. For years, she had put on a brave face, all the while carrying a burden he couldn't see. "I never meant to make you feel like you had to live up to some expectation," Keanu said gently. "I just wanted to be a part of this community, a part of this diner, just like everyone else. I didn't want to be another source of pressure." Alice nodded, wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I know, Keanu, and I'm sorry. I shouldn't have acted like it was such a big deal, but it was hard to separate the person you are on screen from the person who walks through that door. It's hard not to let that affect everything else." Keanu felt a lump in his throat. It was more than just a simple job to Alice, it was a lifeline. And in some way, by being there, he had unknowingly contributed to the very thing that was making it harder for her to feel at ease. "I didn't realize," Keanu whispered, taking a deep breath. "I wish you had told me sooner." Alice shook her head. "It's not that simple. I didn't want to be a burden, but today I felt like I could be honest with you. And for the first time, I felt like maybe I wasn't just some worker here for your convenience. I'm a person too, and I needed you to see that." Keanu stepped closer to Alice, his eyes filled with understanding and sincerity. "I'm glad you're telling me this now. And I want you to know this place, it's yours too. I'm not the star here. You and everyone else who works here are what makes this diner special." Alice smiled through her tears, the weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time, she seemed truly seen, truly heard. "Thank you," she whispered. But before Keanu could say anything else, There was a sudden commotion from inside the diner. The sound of raised voices cut through the quiet afternoon. Keanu's instincts kicked in, and without thinking he turned to rush back inside. "What's going on?" he called out, his heart racing. Alice hesitated for a second before following him. "I don't know, but something's wrong." They entered the diner to find Brian standing behind the counter, looking visibly upset. A group of customers was gathered around, some of them shouting, others simply watching the scene unfold in stunned silence. "Hey, what's going on?" Keanu asked, his voice firm but calm. He didn't want to escalate the situation, but something was clearly wrong. One of the customers, a regular who had been coming to the diner for years, stepped forward. "It's your diner, Keanu. This place is getting run down and nobody's doing anything about it. The food's not what it used to be. The service is slow. We're paying good money, and we expect better than this." Keanu felt a knot form in his stomach. This was the last thing he had expected. He had no idea things had gotten this bad. The diner wasn't just a place to eat. It was a symbol of community, a space for people to gather and connect. He had always believed in its potential, and now it seemed that even the regulars were starting to lose faith. Brian looked at Keanu, his face a mix of frustration and embarrassment. "I've been telling you for months, Keanu. There are issues with the kitchen, with the staff. But every time we try to make changes, you're either too busy or you don't seem to notice." Keanu's heart dropped. He had been so focused on his own personal investigation that he had failed to see the bigger picture. The diner, his safe haven, was falling apart, and it was only now, after hearing the raw, unfiltered truth, that he truly understood the stakes. What do you think Keanu should do next? How should he respond to the challenges the diner is facing? Share your thoughts in the comments. The tension in the diner was palpable. Keanu stood at the counter, his eyes darting between the upset customers, Brian's frustrated expression, and Alice's concerned look. The place that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed to be on the verge of falling apart. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. His diner wasn't just struggling, it was failing, and it was his fault. The customers had a point. The food wasn't as good as it used to be, the service was slower, and the atmosphere, once buzzing with the warmth of a family-owned diner, had become stale. It wasn't just the staff. Keanu had become distracted by his personal struggles, his undercover investigation, and his desire to connect with people without the pressure of his celebrity status. But in doing so, he had lost touch with the very thing that had made the diner successful, the attention to detail, the care, and the personal touch. Keanu inhaled deeply, trying to calm the storm swirling inside him. This wasn't just about making a quick fix. This was about rebuilding what had been lost and starting fresh. "All right," he said, his voice steady but tinged with regret. "Let's sit down and figure this out." The customers seemed taken aback by his calm demeanor. They had expected more defensiveness, more excuses. Instead, Keanu offered them an olive branch, an invitation to be part of the solution. "I've been so focused on the wrong things," he continued, looking directly at the regular customer who had spoken up. "You're right. We've let things slide, but I want to fix it. This place is important to me, and I know it's important to you too, so let's figure out what we can do together." There was a long pause before the regular customer nodded slowly. "Well, we've all been saying it for a while. The food's just not the same, the portions aren't as big, and the flavors aren't what they used to be. The kitchen needs some attention." Keanu turned to Brian. "How long has this been going on?" Brian sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "A few months now. We've had a shortage of ingredients, some of the cooks are new and still learning, and the staff is stretched thin. It's hard to keep up with the quality we had when we first opened." Keanu listened intently, feeling a deep sense of responsibility for the way things had unfolded. He had built this diner on the foundation of hard work, commitment, and authenticity, but somehow he had let those values slip. "Well," Keanu said, turning to Alice and Brian, "it's time for a change. I can't do this alone, but together we can make it better. We'll start fresh, we'll invest in the kitchen, bring in some training, and most importantly, we'll bring back the heart of this place, the community, and the care we put into every meal." Brian and Alice exchanged glances, and for the first time in a while, Keanu saw hope in their eyes. They were in this together. "I think that sounds like a good plan," Brian said, a small smile creeping onto his face. "But we'll need your full commitment this time, Keanu. We need you to be here, not just in spirit, but in action." Keanu nodded, the weight of those words sinking in. He had been so caught up in his own personal journey that he had failed to show up for his business. It wasn't just about having a diner. It was about taking ownership, showing up every day, and making sure the team was supported. "I promise," Keanu said, his voice filled with determination. "I'm here, and I'll make sure this place gets back to being what it should be." The mood in the diner shifted. The tension that had lingered seemed to evaporate as the customers and staff realized that Keanu wasn't just apologizing, he was ready to do the work. He was committed to fixing things, and that gave them hope. As the evening went on, Keanu rolled up his sleeves and got to work. He stayed behind the counter, helping with the dishes, chatting with the regulars, and even pitching in to help in the kitchen. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt right. For the first time in a long time, he was doing the work that mattered. He was present, fully present, and it made all the difference. Over the next few weeks, things began to change. The diner got a fresh coat of paint. The kitchen was revamped, and Keanu brought in a chef who specialized in comfort food, the kind of hearty, home-cooked meals that made diners feel like they were sitting down at their grandmother's table. He also made sure to invest in the staff, offering training and support to help them grow in their roles. But perhaps most importantly, Keanu took the time to connect with his team. He wasn't just a boss, he was a part of the family. He made it a point to listen to their concerns, to ask for their input, and to value their contributions. The diner once again became a place where everyone felt seen and heard. As the weeks turned into months, the diner regained its reputation. The food was better than ever, the staff was happier, and the customers were coming back in droves. The eager atmosphere that Keanu had dreamed of when he first opened the diner was alive again, buzzing with laughter, conversation, and the clink of plates. One day, as Keanu sat at the counter sipping a cup of coffee, Alice and Brian came over to join him. They looked at him with smiles that were genuine, no longer filled with tension or worry. "You did it," Alice said, her voice filled with admiration. "You really turned it around." Keanu smiled, a quiet pride settling in his chest. "We did it. Together." And with that, the diner was more than just a place to eat. It was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even when things fall apart, it's never too late to rebuild. Keanu had learned the hard way that fame wasn't everything. What mattered most was the people around him, the community he had created, and the relationships he had built. And in the end, that was what made the diner truly special. What do you think Keanu learned from his experience at the diner? Have you ever had to rebuild something that felt broken? Share your thoughts in the comments. Keanu leaned back in his chair, watching as the last of the customers trickled out of the diner, the soft hum of the evening settling in. The air was different now, calm, almost peaceful. The once dying energy of the diner had been replaced by a buzz of excitement, as though the very soul of the place had been reignited. The hard work was paying off. Alice and Brian joined him at the counter, both of them looking more relaxed than they had in weeks. There were no more hushed conversations behind the scenes or stressed looks exchanged. They had found their rhythm again, and it felt like a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. "We've really come a long way, haven't we?" Brian said, smiling as he wiped down the counter. "This place feels like it's alive again." Keanu nodded, his eyes scanning the familiar surroundings of the diner. The same booth where he had sat on his first day was still there. The corner, where the regulars always gathered, laughing and chatting, was as vibrant as ever. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was getting there. "It's not just the food or the renovations," Keanu said, his voice thoughtful. "It's the people. This place is only as good as the people who work here, and the people who come through those doors. When we all show up, things start to change, and we're all in this together." Alice smiled, her eyes bright with gratitude. "It's funny. You came in here wanting to experience what it's like to be just another person, and now look at you. You've really become a part of the community. Not as Keanu Reeves, but as someone who cares about this place and the people who make it what it is. Keanu chuckled softly, shaking his head. I never thought I'd be doing this, honestly, but I've learned that sometimes you have to step back and let go of the spotlight. It's not about fame or status. It's about connection. It's about showing up for the people who show up for you. And you've definitely shown up, Brian added. I think we can all agree on that. I've seen a lot of people come and go, but it's clear you're here for the long haul. Keanu smiled, a sense of fulfillment settling deep inside him. This diner, this place that had once been a symbol of his desire for anonymity, had turned into a place of personal transformation. He had come to understand that the power of a community wasn't something you could create overnight. It took time, effort, and most importantly, honesty. I don't think I'll ever forget what I've learned here, Keanu said quietly. It's about more than just showing up. It's about being present, listening, and doing what it takes to make things better, no matter how hard it seems. A comfortable silence hung in the air for a moment before Alice spoke again, her voice filled with hope. So what's next for you, Keanu? Now that you've seen the diner from the inside out, what's your plan? Keanu took a deep breath. I'm going to keep working here. I'm going to keep listening, keep improving, and keep making sure that this place stays a part of the community. I think I've finally realized that fame doesn't define who I am. It's the connections I make with people that do. Alice and Brian exchanged a glance, and for the first time Keanu saw the spark of pride in their eyes. It wasn't about celebrity or what he could offer as Keanu Reeves. It was about his commitment, his willingness to be present and make a difference. Keanu stood up, feeling a sense of finality in the moment. But I want to hear from you. What can we do to make this diner better? What are your ideas, your hopes for the future? Alice smiled. We've got a lot of ideas. Maybe more community events, a monthly special, something to keep the buzz going. People love a good reason to gather, Brian nodded. And we could work on expanding the menu. You know, get more creative with the offerings. Keanu chuckled. All right, let's do it. Let's get creative. Let's bring this place to the next level. And just like that, the conversation turned to plans for the future, ideas, dreams, and hopes for what was to come. The diner was no longer just a place to grab a meal. It was a space for growth, for community, for change. Before he left for the night, Keanu looked around the diner one last time. It wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges ahead, but it felt like the beginning of something special. For the first time, he truly understood the impact a place like this could have on people. It wasn't about the food, or the fame, or even the comfort of a familiar space. It was about the connections, the people who walked through the door, the stories they shared, and the way they made each other feel seen. As he stepped out into the night, Keanu paused for a moment, looking back at the diner. The lights inside still glowed warmly, a beacon of hope in the quiet of the evening. He knew the journey wasn't over. There was still so much more to do, so much more to learn. But for the first time in a long time, he felt ready for whatever came next. What would you do if you were in Keanu's shoes? How would you continue the journey after everything you've learned? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe, because there's always more to discover and more stories to tell.